So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this vast course. I'm going to be talking on femtoLASIK and its complications. I have no financial disclosures to make related to this presentation. So we'll just start off with a couple of videos of the femtoLASIK. I have access currently to the IntraLase device, the IntraLase 150. This is the typical femto. I'll come to the mechanics of the flap. But following the femto part, then the excimer is performed the normal way. What you have to be aware of in a femto flap is that it's a little more sticky than the microkeratome flap, so lifting it is a little bit more challenging. This is the other machine which is mainly in vogue these days, which is the FS200 from Wavelight. As you can see, the way the flap is created is slightly different. There's a canal instead of a pocket in this, and I'll just come to that in the subsequent slides and explain why that's important. So the flap lift, generally what we've seen in our experience is that the Wavelight's flap lift is a little bit smoother and less sticky compared to the IntraLase system. So this is the basic diagram of the flap. You can see that there's a side cut, a flap bed, a hinge, and a pocket. And in the FS200, instead of the pocket, there's a canal. Basically, these two serve as a venting mechanism for gas bubbles to escape, so as to reduce the OBL or the opaque bubble layer, which inhibits the lifting of the flap. So this is just a photograph of the settings we normally keep on our device. The depth can be anywhere between 90 to 120 microns. The diameter of the flap is generally kept at about 9 millimeters. The bed energy, generally you have to play around with that and calibrate it so that the flap lift is easy. The side cut angle, I will come to in the subsequent slides. It's greater than 90 degrees, and the hinge angle is between 45 and 55. So why do we keep these settings? The pocket, as I said, allows egress of air. It reduces the OBL, and generally the pocket, what we have to remember, is at a depth of 220 to 250 microns. It's a little bit deeper than the flap. That's because we want the bubbles to escape into the deeper layers of the cornea, which the collagen is not as tightly packed in. The hinge angle is about 55 degrees, between 45 and 55. The reason for that is the narrower the hinge angle, the greater the area that is exposed, but you can't make the hinge angle too narrow, otherwise when you reposit the flap, there's a chance of flap striae. So we'll go to the complications later, and I'll show you what happens there. The flap diameter, commonly, like I said, is 9 millimeters. The side cut angle, inverted side cuts are more in vogue. That means greater than 90 degrees because literature says that there's less dry eye and better stability of the flap when you do a slightly higher than 90 degree side cut angle. There are various different femto devices, like I mentioned, available in the market. These are tables just highlighting the differences between them. Broadly, I've highlighted the key factors in these devices. The Wavelight has the fastest creation of the flap, as it's a 200 kilohertz laser. The femto LDV is the narrowest footprint, so it's more mobile compared to the other devices. The IntraLase's suction is not inbuilt, it's with a syringe, so that's one thing which the other machines do a little bit better. The applanation surface is generally planar except for the VisuMax. I think Dr. Sonu will talk about that later. And then the costing is different in the different devices, and the constant temperature and humidity requirements are there for the IntraLase and the Wavelight. Coming to complications, I've divided them into intraoperative and postoperative complications. So we'll go through the intraoperative ones first. The first one that I'd like to show this video of is a suction loss, which occurs. It can occur. The vacuum built up by the laser is not as strong as by the microkeratome. It doesn't reach as a higher vacuum level, so you can have this kind of suction loss during the raster pass. It's important to remember that the handling of the suction loss is different if it happens during the raster or during the side cut. If it happens during the raster, you can just redock, switch off the pocket setting because you've already made the pocket, and then go ahead, because generally your applanation is fairly good and fairly consistent, and then you can just reposit the flap in a normal way. If you have a suction loss during the side cut, what you need to do is again redock, but make a deeper and a narrower flap. basically so that you do not have two planes and you do not have difficulty lifting. This is one where there was a mild movement of the patient during the procedure, which is why the flap was uncut in one area, and we had to use a crescent to actually to fashion that part of the flap so that we could lift it. So if this thing happens in the periphery, it's okay, it's safe to lift it, but try to dissect with blunt instruments. That's the take home to take from this. So factors for suction loss: flat corneas, deep set eyes, narrow palpebral fissures, lid squeezing or a change in the patient position. As I said, suction loss during the raster, just redock and switch off the pocket. Whereas during the side cut, you have to redock and make a smaller flap so that you don't end up with two planes. Coming to the next complication, which was a folded flap, as we can see here. The flap edge has inverted, and now there's epithelium that's grown into that particular area. So you actually need to debride the epithelium from there. The reason is that if you just lift this flap and put it over that, the epithelium will be under the flap, and that can lead to epithelial ingrowth and further problems. What we need to do is to carefully lift the flap after hydration of it, then try and if we are seeing any striae, try to deposit it, pull it in two separate directions with the Meroseal sponge, remove the epithelium, because that's a very important factor that tethers the flap striae in place. So if you want to remove flap striae, it's always important to look at the epithelium. If it's immediately post-op, you can get away without removing it, but most of the time it is advisable to remove the epithelium for managing flap striae or folded flap. Here we can see macro striae which are coming into the visual axis. So this is significant. The patient is going to definitely have visual complaints because of this. Again, it's important to carefully go and lift this flap. We can see that we are going under the flap, just carefully repositing it. And again, here you would want to remove all the epithelium that is on the bed, which has grown in because the flap has moved away from its position. The gutter would be infiltrated by epithelium. So first you remove that, do a thorough wash, make sure that there are no epithelial cells underneath. Then here we first attempted to reduce the flap striae without removing the epithelium, but then subsequently realized that they're going to be quite tightly anchored, and then removed the epithelium and did the reposition of the flap after that, after floating it with BSS. So managing flap striae, macro striae are due to misaligned flaps, and these are usually visually significant. Dryness is a very common cause, as is squeezing eyes. The management involves, as I showed in the videos, gently stroking the flap, lifting and repositioning it. It's important to remove the epithelium, as I mentioned, and the prevention, as we say, is the best cure. Marking the flap firsthand may be a better idea, so that you'll get a good idea whether the flap is back in its original place or not. Flap tears, well, not very common with femtosec with recently, but thinner flaps are at higher risk for flap tears. That means anything less than 100 microns, 90 microns flaps. As the femto flap is a little bit more difficult to lift, you can have a flap tear. If it's in the periphery, there's again no problem. You can continue with your procedure. A larger flap tear involving the pupillary axis, it's important to abandon the procedure, reposition the flap, and then shift to a surface ablation at a later date. This is a video of what is called a vertical gas breakthrough, which is the equivalent of a buttonholing that we get in microkeratome LASIK. You can see that dark area in the center, and then suddenly it vents and the air bubble comes out through the Bowman's and the epithelium. So why does this happen? Because cavitation bubbles dissect through the Bowman's layer and epithelium, and a buttonhole is created with a deep black appearance. The risk factors for this are a thin flap. So usually in my LASIK practice, most of the time I try to convince patients for femto LASIK, except when they have a corneal scar or radial keratotomy, because these are at higher risk for vertical gas breakthrough. The management is generally, if you have a complete vertical gas breakthrough, abort the procedure and defer for surface ablation at a later date. Do not lift the flap, otherwise you can cause major issues in these flaps, irregularities, scarring. You can have a whole gamut of problems because of that. A partial buttonhole will be seen when you don't get that dark area. The bubbles stop beneath the Bowman's membrane, and it's a whitish appearance. In literature, it is said that you can continue safely in a partial buttonholing, partial vertical gas breakthrough. However, I don't personally have any experience with this. Other common side effects like DLK, that's common to both the microkeratome and the FS LASIK. There are different stages of DLK, the stage 1 where it's in the periphery, stage 2 where it goes towards the center, stage 3 where it causes significant drop in vision, and stage 4 where you have a melting or a thinning of the flap over it. Topical steroids and oral steroids are the treatments for stage 3 relift and wash. Coming to the next complication, this is a peripheral ulcerative keratitis. This was a patient who actually had a femtoLASIK, presented the next day in the morning, was completely normal, but came in at 3 p.m. with this kind of picture. Now, at first glance, I thought this was an infective keratitis, so I started the patient on vancomycin and amikacin and continued the lubricants. And to my horror, the next day I saw in the left eye the same thing appearing, despite having initially given the patient steroids, then stopped them, and then shifted over to antibiotics. This was the slit image. We could see an area of DLK and infiltrate. I went through literature, consulted with a couple of my professors at Narayan Nethralaya, and they said that because it was proceeding around the flap margin and not extending centrally, it was more likely to be an immune cause rather than an infection. And so I started steroids again with trepidation, but gradually the patient improved. This is the final picture at day 15, where the patient is much better. And possible causes for this, basically it's trapping of the antigens under the contact lens, which leads to an inhibition of the cyclooxygenase pathway, collection of leukotrienes, and therefore this can cause this problem. Couple of slides. Central toxic keratopathy, important to diagnose, because what we have to remember is it's a central opacity. It looks a little bit by DLK, but lifting the flap and steroids doesn't work. These tend to resolve spontaneously in 2 to 18 months, though there is a hyperopic shift, so you have to counsel the patient carefully regarding this. Rainbow glare is again a complication peculiar to femtoLASIK, mostly seen if the femto is done but the excimer is aborted for some reason. And generally it does settle down with time, but surface ablation following a treatment of the surface may be needed. Epithelial ingrowth again is common to both, so I'll let my subsequent speakers take over the talk on that. Transient photophobia is again because of insult to the ciliary body and inflammation. The lower energy reduces incidence, so again that's why it's important to optimize your bed settings, and treatment is with topical steroids. PISC is another peculiar complication where there's a steroid response and an increased IOP. As you can see in the OCT, there's a fluid collection in the interface with the diffuse haziness, and the treatment is to stop steroids and start anti-glaucoma medications. Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge all my people who contributed videos and helped me make this presentation.